Hi, I'm Lisa Bagshaw. Welcome to Bold Leaps, the show that interviews creative, inspiring, successful people about the risks they've taken to pursue their dreams. And today's guest is internationally acclaimed writer, lawyer, and advocate, Michelle Good. Impacted by the 60s scoop, Michelle popped out of the foster system at 18 with no money, skills, or support. She faced abandonment and perceived herself as deeply traumatized. And yet, there was a fearless force inside of her, a survivor who worked for Indigenous organizations for 25 years. And in her early 40s, she took herself to UBC to become a lawyer. While she was a practicing lawyer, advocating for survivors of residential schools, Michelle had a burning desire to write a book, a dream she had had since she was a little girl, addressing the question, why won't they get over it? She was slowly writing the book for 9 years while practicing law until she got serious and went to the UBC Fine Arts program at 58. In 2021, at 64, she published her debut novel, Five Little Indians, which has been showered with accolades, awards, international recognition, and an option for a limited TV series. And she's since written another passionate and essential book, Truth Telling, which is also meeting with massive acclaim. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
Your story is one that just absolutely astounds me. Your fearlessness in the pursuit of your dreams, your ability to overcome, your ability to persevere, and your ability to have massive achievement. It's just so inspirational.
Thank you.
Where I'd love to start is before you went into the foster care system. What were you like as a little child?
Oh, I was a little weirdo. I always had a book and I always had a journal. I was one of those funny little kids walking around with a journal. Oh, and I was writing always from the time I was about 10, 11 years old. It was just the way I was. And I was an enthusiastic child about life. It just everything seemed so brilliant. And but I think I was a writer early on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And were you fearless even early on?
I don't think I've ever been fearless. I think what I've been is determined not to let fear stop me from doing what I felt I needed to do and wanted to do. I think fear is a really important thing to have because, it helps guide you through, the risks and the dangers of everyday life when you're living a life of a foster child and so on. I just never let fear stop me from doing what I needed to do.
And your mother seemed like she was also a highly accomplished woman.
Yes, she was. In 1947, we still needed to get passes to leave the reserve in Canada from the Indian agent or the church official or whomever. My mom was off in New Zealand studying nursing and midwifery because she was a force of nature. She was a determined person as well. And, that's quite a role model to have as a child.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And she believed in you.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe she did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what about after foster care, when you came out of the system at 18 and without a nickel to your name and any skills, how did you cope? What were your coping mechanisms?
Oh, gee, that's a hard one. I think just always looking forward is trying not to focus on the challenges and the hardship, but just looking forward. What do you want to do? How can you get there? And, and I've been blessed with certain opportunities that seem like chance, and maybe they're chance if you believe in chance. But meeting Chief George Manuel when I was 18 and ending up working with his organization, and he was a very, very influential Indigenous leader. And, that put me on a course that has allowed me to work with some amazing people and do some amazing kinds of work. So yeah, I've been fortunate in that way, yeah.
And then how did you get to, at 40, to get to law school? I mean, that seems like a gigantic leap right there.
Well, you know, from the time I was really young, I think it was grade 6 that I first thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And I got to be about 38 and I thought, well, if you're going to do it, you better do it. And so I didn't even know that people studied for the LSAT. I just went and wrote it, right? And so that was kind of amusing.
You did not study for the LSAT? No. And you passed?
And I passed.
First
yes.
time?
Yes, yeah. So, yeah, so it was an interesting experience, though, I'll tell you. Yeah. So.
And going through everything you went through, how did you feel when you were called to the bar at, was it 44?
43.
43.
No, my 44th birthday.
40,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was actually right in my birthday week. It was great. Well, you know, it was a moment, right? It was a real moment to look back on the challenges and, you know, the fact that I actually did it. I mean, and not just the challenges of law school that anybody faces, but the inherent racism that I experienced in the school, and, you know, and ageism. I had a professor who, our first day, we all had to introduce ourselves and so on, and I introduced myself, and she said to me, conventionally, mature students don't do well.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so how's that for some encouragement? But she's dead, I'm not. And I also graduated with the highest marks in the Aboriginal law program. Yeah. So, you know, I think I respond to those kind of negative challenges, right? When people say you can't, I respond more strongly than if someone says you can do it, right? If someone says you can do it, yeah, right. But if someone says you can't do it, it's like, watch me, right? It's like throwing down a challenge, and I feel an obligation to achieve when someone tells me I can't. Right?
So did you, when you were at UBC in law school, did you feel that there was a lot of pushback towards your potential success?
Not a lot. There was that, you know, but you know, I was accepted into law school as a mature student and in the Indigenous law or Aboriginal law program as it was then. And what they were doing, I guess kind of an affirmative action program, is you didn't necessarily have to have a degree, but nobody really has to have an undergraduate degree to get into law school. You can apply under various ways. But it was probably more strenuous to get in that way, to get admission that way, than if I had a degree and, you know, just apply. We had to write a big thing about, you know, why we should get into law school, and had to have a relevant work history, and, you know, all of these conditions that other people didn't. But the students at the school some students at the school were of the attitude that you're only here because you're Indigenous. You're not smart enough to be here. You haven't earned the right to be here. You've just been given this, which is something, you know, it's a theme, if you will, throughout all kinds of things that we deal with as Indigenous people. So, you know, that was not a great experience, but, you know.
One more thing that you had to overcome.
I guess. Yeah.
Well, that's a good time to take a break. We do have to take a break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask Michelle about the incredibly brave journey of her debut novel, Five Little Indians. Welcome back to Bold Leaps. Michelle, thank you again for being here. So, you have got your degree from UBC, you're a practicing lawyer, you're advocating for the survivors of residential schools, you have enough work to last for your lifetime, but you have a burning passion to write this book.
Yeah.
How did those two work together?
Well, I mean, I guess the desire to communicate the reality of the residential school experience is something that was in my mind from the time I was a child, when I first started hearing about my mother's experiences at residential school. But when I was representing survivors, you become, I think, more attuned to the commentary in the general public. And that commentary was, of course, why can't they just get over it? Mm-hmm. So here I am spending my day in, day out, listening to some of the most horrific stories that you can imagine. And on the other side of the coin, listening to uninformed people asking, why can't they just get over it? And so I decided I'm going to answer that question. And that's what the book is a response to that.
Mm-hmm. And you've written it, and everyone said it, but I'm going to say it too, in the most accessible way for people to read it and have a new understanding. But now, so you were writing it while you were practicing law. So what, and sort of going for 9 years writing, I'm sure you were busy and everything. But then you decided to get serious about the book and go to UBC and get your Master's of Fine Arts.
Well, the chronology is a bit off because when I decided it was time to write the book, similar to, okay, if you're going to go to law school, you better get on with it, right? Mm-hmm. I was practicing law, and I decided to go to the MFA program at UBC while I was still practicing, because that would require me to write. It would require me to carve out the time to do the writing. And so I did. And that's where the first draft of the book was written, was in the MFA program. Yeah.
Okay, so the whole book took 9 years. So you did go to
no, I had the first draft in 2 years, 3 years, whatever that program is. Yeah. So.
And did you have, because I read in Truth Telling, which is amazing, by the way, not the softball that 5 Little Indians is, which is necessary too. Yeah. But did you feel that you had the confidence to write a novel? Did you believe in yourself?
I knew that I was uniquely qualified to tell these stories, not only because of, being an intergenerational survivor myself, but because of my work and because I'd been involved in this for so long, and my firsthand understanding of it really qualified me to tell this story.
Did you struggle with, because I know you mentioned in this book that there was some mental health issues with believing in yourself and worthiness that...
Not believing in myself. I've always believed in myself.
Okay, good.
But the worthiness thing as well. When you experience traumatic things and you obviously are going to question, why did that happen to me? It must be because I am less important, less valuable than another person that those things didn't happen to. And that creates, not so much confidence issues, but just self-esteem issues that can be undermining.
That's what I'm wondering about, because so many people have low self-esteem or low self-worth and wouldn't take themselves to UBC to write the book.
Yeah.
How did you overcome that?
Well, if it wasn't a story that I felt was mandatory, if it wasn't a story that I felt had to be told, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I was so personally embroiled in this awful reality that I just felt that I had an obligation to do it. And so I did. Yeah.
Because I would think it would be a stretch to write. I know you wrote from an early age and very accomplished poet as well. But I would think from writing sort of legal documents to writing such a beautiful novel, it would be a stretch.
It's different. It's very different. And part of the MFA program was weaning myself from that very sort of professional kind of writing and allowing the more creative inspiration to take over, right? But, that's something that has been a part of my life for so long that it didn't take a long time to just sort of fall into the groove of creative writing versus professional writing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, you did an absolutely beautiful job, and you've had nothing but positive feedback on it.
I almost pulled it. just before it was about to be published, I called my editor. I said, don't do it. I don't want to do it. I'll pay you back the advance. I just don't want to do it. No. And, I came around and obviously, because here it is. But, the notion of anybody being able to walk into a bookstore, open a book, and know how I think was horrifying. Right? It was terrifying. But I got over it. It took a while. But, yeah. I live a very solitary, private life. And so it felt like I was almost infringing on my own boundaries by putting this book out there, because my heart and soul is in that book. And so it was like, oh no, what have I done? So, but I have no regrets at all. But I think that's probably happens more often than we might think, with authors that are about to have their first book come out. It's quite a daunting experience, really. One of the things that I felt, especially when writing truth-telling, was that, but certainly, like the reason that I went with fiction for Five Little Indians versus nonfiction was I think that if you can personalize an experience, if you can present an experience in a way that people can relate to, then their chances of really understanding it in a meaningful way are much higher. And that's why with truth-telling, I talk about some of my own experiences. And because I felt like if they can understand my story from the 60s scoop and all of the things that happened during that time, they can extrapolate that and they can understand it on a larger scale and, perhaps be more compassionate, more understanding, more active in, resolving these issues that are still outstanding.
So that's what makes it an even bigger leap, is the actual getting these very personal stories published.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that I've always been a leap kind of person anyway, right? Just do it.
Didn't you, when we first talked, you said, you gave me an expression.
What was that?
Leap or die.
That's right. Well, you have these, when you're living on the edges, right? Like in foster care, right a short period of time after foster care before I, found my way or found a direction, it's like that. The narrow options between really falling off the edge of the world and surviving, it's just right there in your face all the time. There's no luxury of being able to sit back for a couple of months and think, what am I going to do?
No.
Right? You have to act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually a very good piece of advice that you learned the hard way.
Yeah.
I'm so sure. We have to take another break, but stay with us because I'm going to ask Michelle about how life is now and what advice she has for those of us too afraid to pursue our dreams when we come back. Welcome back to Bold Leaps with Michelle Good. So you look at your life now. Everything that you have been through is inconceivable, as is your success and your achievement. What do you make of your life now?
I never would have imagined it, except I did imagine it, right? When I was a little kid, I imagined writing. And it was really funny because there was a professor up at UBC who was a friend of mine, a childhood friend. And we hadn't seen each other since we were about 13 years old. And there was some event that we ended up together at. And she said, do you remember the time that you told me that you were going to leave that town that we, were born into and you were going to be a writer? Do you remember that? And I didn't, right? I always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I set out to do those things and I did them. And, so I feel pretty satisfied with life that it's come this way, that I have few worries. I can write what I want to write about, and the world is anxious to receive it. The publishing world, anyway. I don't know about the world, but yeah.
So I think the world is very anxious to receive it.
So, but yeah. So life is pretty sweet right now. Touch wood. Yeah. And I mean, I saw a podcast once with Tom Hanks, of all people. And he was talking about in the early days of his career when there were challenges and so on, and he would always say to himself, this too shall pass. But that applies whether you're successful or not. This too shall pass. And so I am obliged to just be eternally thankful for how things have turned out, because this is pretty special.
It sure is. It's amazing to even just meet you and hear your story in person.
And you can't take these things for granted, right? Because the world has many forces. Anything can happen.
Anything can happen.
Yeah.
Well, we only have time for 2 more quick questions.
Okay.
Okay. The first one is, what is the biggest lesson you've learned through all of this?
Don't let fear stop you. Fear is natural, right? But it shouldn't be larger than your desire to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
What is your advice for people who are too afraid to pursue their dreams?
Be brave. Stand up. Do your stuff. The world needs whatever you have to offer. Don't be afraid. It'll be all right.
What advice would you give to people who say, but how? I have all this fear and it's debilitating me. How do I move through it?
One step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's one of the problems people have is they look at an objective, but they just consider it as I'm here now and I want to get there, instead of thinking, well, how do I get to the next step? Mm-hmm. And then the next step and the next step. And, if you are methodical in the way you figure out what you need to do, then the road opens up, right? But it's not a given that you can get from here to there. And so you have to work on, well, how? And just step by step. We can only take one step at a time. Mm-hmm. There's been lots of science lately about there's no such thing as multitasking, right? You can only take one step at a time. And then, celebrate each one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is excellent advice. I'm so disappointed our time is up. But thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you for writing these incredibly important books at this time, and congratulations on all your success. I know I've heard you're writing a novel, but I'm hoping you're going to write a memoir.
Well, we'll see how long I live.
You got lots more time.
We'll see.
Well, that's it for another episode of Bold Leaps. Check us out on YouTube and social media for more inspiring episodes and updates. Tell us your bold leaps in the comments. Special thanks to our sponsors, and remember, every step you take is a step toward your dreams.